everyone. This is Pradipta. It has been a while since I've been here, so for some issues and for some personal issues, I couldn't upload any videos, a lot of videos lately, but I'm here now and I'm really excited to be back. And today I'm here to talk about basically my top 10 favorite book of 2021. 2021 has not really been a great year for me in general, and but book wise, it has been a fantastic year for me. I have read so many books that I really, really, really adored, and I found a lot of hidden gems, a lot of genre bending books that really took a special place in my heart. And I'm so excited to talk about them. And it was hard to narrow down the whole list to 10 books. So I'm going to talk about the top 10 books in this video, but I might make another video where I talk about my other favorite books which did not make to this list, but really, really worth a shout out to. So without further ado, let's talk about the books. These books are not really in any particular order. They are the I read like almost 42 books last year, and among them, these 10 books are like I could not talk about them sort of books. So obviously they're not in it's hard at least to narrow it down to 10 books. So they're not in any particular order, they're just as we go, we are going to talk about it. And the first book I want to talk about is The Nightingale by Christine Hanna. And I know this is a old one and I'm quite late to the party, but I read this book this year and I absolutely adored it. It's an amazing masterpiece which follows two sisters during World War II. It's a historical fiction novel, World War II, and we follow these two sisters, Vivienne, yeah, Vivienne and Isabel, completely different opposite of each other. And Vivienne is more like a housewife and quiet, and she doesn't like too much drama in her life. Where Isabel is this brave, bold, wild creature who is born to break rules. So we follow both of them through World War II, before World War II and after World War II. So we see their struggles and we see how, even though they are two different peoples, how their struggles and their emotions as a woman during wartime is almost the same. It's a story so wonderfully written, and it's a story about how we as women don't really get much recognition for the things we have done, for the sacrifices we have made. We talked a lot about the male who has sacrificed their lives in World War II or any major wars, but we don't really talk about the hidden women who really helped and sacrificed more than any of them, but don't really get that much recognition like they should. And this book tells the story of those two women, and it portrays how people can be different, people can be completely apart from each other, but how still they can be connected through some emotions, through some struggles, through some feelings that are hard to describe in words. Completely took me out of the world, and it was such an amazing ride, such an emotional ride. I mean, I cried and laughed and hugged this book when I finished reading this. It's so wonderful. And Christine Hanna's writing is really, really, really beautiful. I'm really excited to read her other books. She has written a lot of other books, and I have heard all of them are mostly literary fiction, but still, I'm really excited to read them. And if you are new to the historical fiction genre, or if you want to try something historical fictiony, I would definitely suggest this book. Yes, you will bawl your eyes out, but it is gonna be so worth it. Please give this book a read. It's amazing. Next, I want to talk about another book which is so close to my heart. It's not only one of my favorite books of 2021, I think this is one of my most favorite books I have ever read, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This book, if you are someone who is a digger for found family trope and wholesome content, this book is for you. I mean, I finished this book in one day, which is pretty fast for me. I'm a really slow reader, but this was such an amazing ride. I remember I finished this book and I was just like, I was completely transformed in this island, in this atmosphere, which it was completely left me speechless. So This book follows two main characters, Linus and Arthur. Linus is basically this is a magical realism book. So Linus works in a department of ministry where they work for magical children, magical endangered children, where they go to these orphanages and figure out what to do with these children who have strange magical powers. So Linus, in the beginning of this book, Linus is assigned with a task, with an assignment, where he has to go to this island, and there's this orphanage of magical children. He has to go to that island and make an assignment of about those children, about how they're staying there, or are they a danger to the other people of the island, or the other people outside the island. Linus arrives in that island, and he meets these five, I guess, yes, five magical children, and this caretaker of them called Arthur, who are they're not what Linus expected at all. In the beginning, he's quite skeptical, and he's really, in doubt about them. But as we approach in our story, Linus gets tangled with their mess, with their beautiful, beautiful mess, and beautiful, wonderful, messy family. And we find ourselves in situations where you cannot help but root for all of these children and Arthur and Linus. I mean, every single character of this book portrays so much humanity, so much wholesomeness. I mean, there are literally scenes which feel like a hug. That has never happened to me with any books before, but there are so many, not one, like multiple scenes where I felt like someone was hugging me, but I was reading a scene in a book. This is a wonderful book if you want to have a good time, if you want to have a quick, magical, whimsical, and wonderful read. I really, really suggest you pick up this one because it's a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It just filled my heart with so much happiness and love and affection. It's wonderful. The next book that I want to talk about is a book. I don't really have a physical copy of that book, and that book is called We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. This book, I was going through a really bad reading slump in June, July time of the year, and I couldn't read any books. I was going through a lot of hard time in my home, but still, as I said, books have always been an escape for me. But during that time, I couldn't just concentrate on any books. I tried and tried and tried, but I could not get through any books. This book came at a perfect time in my life. I mean, it just reminded me why I love reading so much, why I love books so much. So this basically follows, it's a thriller book, this which is really different for me because I barely ever read thriller books. I'm a really scaredy cat. I get really scared and really triggered if I ever read any thriller books, but I picked this book up quite skeptically because it was a contemporary thriller book, so I thought it would be easy to get into, and I really needed something fast paced to get into. So I picked this book up, and this basically follows a family, where we follow the point of view of a girl in this family, teenage girl, who's a really rich family but with a lot of dark secrets. Every year they spend a holiday in this island where numerous mysterious things happen, but we don't really know what has happened as we go through the story. Neither does the main character, whose point of view we are following, knows what exactly happened. So it's really interesting to see all these gaps throughout the book, that what is happening or what has happened. We don't know that. The main character, doesn't know that, but we follow it, and slowly, as the puzzle begins to solve itself, it's a really. I mean, when I got to the climax, when I got to the plot twist of this book, it felt like someone just slapped me. It was so out of the blue. It was so, I mean, I did not see it coming. It was just, I I was just left completely speechless. And this book really made me want to read a lot of more thriller books because it's not only a really good time, it's also really, you're like, what just happened? What have I been reading for so long? What the hell just happened? And this book was like that for me, and I really enjoyed it. And it's a very popular book on Book Talk, I have heard. And if you want an easy read, a quick read, a read that will just leave you speechless within like 2 hours, yes, this is short book and fast-paced book, so you can just read it in one sitting. It's so amazing, so wonderful. Please pick this book up if you are a thriller fan. Even if you're not, if you want to get into the thriller genre like I did, you really, really should pick this book up. It will get you out of your reading slump. It will make you fall in love with thrillers. It will make you fall in love with reading. I promise you. So the next book I'm going to talk about is another thriller book which I picked up after reading We Were Liars. It's not really it's basically a literary fiction book, but it has a thriller element at its core. So this book is called Where the Forest Meets the Stars, and this book was it was a very human experience, very different experience for me. I picked this book up knowing literally nothing about it. I just heard it's a very sensitive and very human story, so I was in the mood for it. I wanted some thriller, so I just picked this book up, and it was hard in the beginning to get into the book because it felt like, it's a different, it's confusing at first in the beginning of this book, but as you approach it gets so amazing. So this book follows basically three main characters. The female character of this book, the main female character, she finds this girl during her, she's a scientist, so she finds this girl during her research in a rural area in Chicago, a little girl like 5, 6, or 8, 9 years old, who tells this scientist woman that she is an alien sent from outer space in this world to see some miracle. So obviously, since that woman is scientist, she does not believe that little girl, and she, tries to search for her parents, or she tries to contact police stations and stuff like that because she thinks that this little girl is lost. But she also finds some mysterious, marks on the girl's body which she doesn't know what to do about. She thinks maybe this girl is harassed at home, so what could I do? She doesn't want to send this little girl back at that home. So she basically goes through the whole process of knowing this girl, even though throughout the whole story the girl keeps telling her that she's this alien sent from outer space. She does not remove from this story at all. And as we approach in our story, we also get introduced to another character, the main male character of this book. I forgot all the characters' name. I'm sorry. You can look this up on Goodreads. But that male character has a really, really great representation of depression. The whole the main female character represents breast cancer and stuff like that, and the male character represents depression. So the whole representation of these two diseases, where one is physical and another is psychological, it's so wonderfully done. This is a book that really deals with really, really, really sensitive topics, but I will still say that this is one of the most wholesome books I have read this year, because it not only shows the diseases or the struggles or the ugly part of human beings, but also shows like really, really deep and intense and wonderful interactions through this, through how people find each other in their dark times and stick to them. And it's a wonderful book for that. It's also a book that you will not really see the ending coming, but even though it gets a little bit predictable, this was a wonderful experience through the whole book. It's amazing. It's all the characters in this books are super lovable. You're going to fall in love with the little girl, Ursa. Her name is Ursa. I just remembered. You are going to fall in love with this girl so hard in the beginning of this book. She's adorable, and the interaction Ursa has with our main male character and female character is something so amazing, so wholesome. You just don't want the book to end. You just want to read more about their interactions and their trips and tricks and hangouts and stuff like that, and it's really amazing. Please pick this book up. This is a very unique book, very human book, and I promise you'll have a great time. Next, I have another fantasy book, one of my, not really fantasy, it's also sort of a thriller book, but it has a dark academia vibe to it, which I absolutely adore. And that book is called, it's a pretty popular book and fan favorite, Truly Devious. It's a trilogy, I think. No, I think the fourth book has come out too, but mainly it's a trilogy. So I read the first book of this series this year, and again, I was going through a slump, and this book came at the perfect time. It had the perfect setting, perfect characters, perfect pace, which really made me want to dig into this. It basically follows our main character who is sent into this school in this very remote area where she has to a school for special children, for intelligent and unique children, and she has to go there. She's sent there she's assigned with the investigation of two people of that school who are basically the founder's family. So really old case, and she has almost nothing to go on about. But things change when something happens with during her time at the school too. I'm not gonna say what, because it was sort of a, it's sort of a spoiler. So she gets tangled in this very complicated, cat and mouse game, and our story approaches from there. This book also had really relatable character. The main character of this book had anxiety disorder, which I also have, unfortunately, and I really related to her because the way Maureen Johnson described the whole anxiety situation was, I felt really seen, because that's what really happens, and it's a really major and real issue. Not all the people get that, but the way she portrayed our main character battling anxiety along with battling an investigation of a murder, which I felt pretty badass and wonderful. And it follows another characters, a lot of other supporting characters who are really lovable and really amazing. And it also has a school setting, so if you are searching for a school setting where a bunch of kids just keep getting into troubles and doesn't know what to do to get out of those troubles, this book is for you. It was a wonderful time. This is also a short book, so it doesn't really take that much time to read it, but it's amazing, and it made my top 10 books of this year because it really left a special mark in my heart because of its wonderfulness and its dark academia vibes and the relatable main character and the plot twists, which was wonderful. Next, I have two contemporary books to talk about. If you would have told me like a year ago that contemporary is going to two YU contemporary are going to make it to my top 10 books of the year list, I would not have believed you. But I read some really unique young adult contemporary books this year, which really changed my view towards young adult literature. I feel like they don't get as much as recognition that they need to get. I feel like there are a lot of books out there, young adult books out there, who portrays really wonderful and unique messages, and I think everyone should read them. I think especially these two books, I think they both should be considered classics after 10 years from now. And one of them is called The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And this book basically follows our main character, Star, who is a 16-year-old girl who lives this double life where she has to portray herself as the star of her, shady neighborhood, but also as the star of the only black girl in her all white school, like rich kids school. So we follow Star through these two different lifestyles she tries to lead by herself. And in the beginning of this book, someone really close to Star, someone who she considers as her friend, her best friend, is killed by a white police. And our story starts from there. It is basically after the Black Lives Matter movement. I read this book after that, and I felt like Angie Thomas did a wonderful job about writing about this. It actually proves how it really doesn't end. I mean, this book was written a long time ago, before George Floyd, before the Black Lives Matter movement, but we still see the exact same things that happened in this book. Here, after the Star's friend is killed, here comes a really big movement, and we follow Star as she struggles through. She's a normal teenage girl, right? She has these all sorts of confusing feelings, or all sorts of, she's really traumatized to see her best friend die in front of her, get murdered in front of her. But as she tackles racism and all the other sensitive and major traumatizing experiences, we see that how nothing really has changed. We should do something about that. The first step towards that doing something is educating yourself, and I think everyone should read this book to know what really these people, these people who are a minority in that area in America, what they go through, or what they go through on daily basis. I mean, they don't even, they go through this. For example, Star has this friend, a white girl in her school, that that girl is being racist, but she doesn't even know that she's being racist. So, I mean, she's so ignorant and so, self-centered that she says things like really, really hurtful and sensitive. Even though Star tells her again and again that this is offensive, you should not talk like this, nothing really changes because that girl refuses to believe that she's being a racist. So the first step towards any of these things is educating yourself and reading these sorts of books so that you really know what these people go through, what they want from us, or what they really, how you can be of use to in any of these movements like the Black Lives Matter, and how we can maybe one day we can stop things like these from happening. And this was a wonderful book, The Hate You Give. It tackled really sensitive issues in a very smart way. And I really love this author's writing. I think I will pick up more books by her, and everyone should read this book for numerous reasons. And the first one is to educate yourself on these matters. The next book I'm going to talk about is called The Radio Silence. I know it's a very popular book, but I heard about this book a long time ago. It's a YA contemporary book, as I said, and for some reasons, I didn't pick this book up when I first heard about it, but I finally picked this book up this year. I'm so mad at myself actually that I did not pick this book up earlier, because it's such a wonderful book. It follows these two main characters who are, completely different from each other, but they're bonded through the secret fandom that they share. It may feel like typical YA books because it has a guy and it has a girl, and they follow a same fandom. We follow a friendship through this fandom. But as you go through this story, you realize that this is not that what you think. This is not what you think, and this is completely different from that. I mean, literally, the synopsis of this book has this line that there's this guy, there's this girl. So you might think this is a romantic, you might think they will fall in love, but that doesn't happen. It's so amazing, so unique. It has a lot of sensitive issues talked about in this book. And when you begin this book, you might think that, okay, so this is like all the other YA contemporaries. There's nothing, what can be there that's new? But I promise you, as you go through the story, you will find so many sensitive and different and less talked about issues portrayed throughout the whole book that really, marks you as a person and leaves a scar in you and just makes you feel like that, wow, I have never read anything like this before in young adult contemporary or in any other genre. And I used to really enjoyed this book so much. Basically, it's a book about friendship and family and all sorts of love, basically. And I'm being vague about this because the less you know about this book, the more you're going to enjoy it. So I'm just going to say that this is a completely unique experience. It has a lot of mental health rep, LGBTQ rep, and a lot of other sensitive and less talked about reps in this book. And I'm really glad I picked this book up finally. And please, and I hope you do that the same. It's so wonderful, so amazing. You'll have an amazing and human and, heart wrenching, but yet a really wholesome time. Let's go back to fantasy again. And this book is, I can't really be too descriptive about the plot of this book because it is a third and final book of a trilogy. So if I say anything too descriptive about the plot, I'm going to spoil it. But I'm going to tell you that the first thing, that this is a book if you want something completely unique and atmospheric, and if you just want an escape from the whole world, from your life, from everything, this is the perfect book to pick up, especially during winter. And that is called The Winter of the Witch. This is the third and final book. The first book is called The Bear and the Nightingale, and this whole trilogy is called the Winter Night Trilogy by Catherine Arden. I read the first two books of of this trilogy last year, and I completely fell in love with it. Especially, the more I read in the series, the more the character growths and the plot growth became so amazing and magnificent that I completely fell in love with it. And the last book was was my most favorite book through this whole trilogy. It follows our main character Vasya in 14th century Russia, in a very remote village of 14th century Russia in the beginning of The Bear and the Nightingale, where Vasya is this, you can guess that 14th century is not really a good time for women. They're basically these objects who are only used as, to give birth to children and raise them. But Vasya has this really wild and wonderful heart where she wants to, break the barriers and wants to go outside her village, see the world, and fight alongside her brothers and stuff like that, which isn't really something that comes easily to a woman during that age. But our Vasya is not someone who gives up. She keeps fighting and fighting, and this is basically a Russian folklore retelling. So there are a lot of fantastical and mythical creatures throughout this whole series that are so wonderfully portrayed. I have realized that when I read magical realism book before this book, I it always felt a little bit bizarre because obviously it's fantasy, but in this book it's so wonderfully done. You feel like that you are in that snowy forest, you are in that place, galloping through remote Russia in a horse. It's so amazing, it's so beautifully written, and I really love this author's writing. I really hope that I pick up more of her books. This was such a wild ride, and since this is the last book, there are a lot of supporting characters in this book that I really, really loved and adored. And the character growth they had, the conclusion they had was really, really touched my heart. And I absolutely love this book. Everyone should read this, please, especially so that I can have someone else to talk about this book, because there are very few people I know around me have read this trilogy. And please, please, if you read this book, if you read this trilogy, I really want you to let me know so that I can rant to you about it. It's such an amazing ride. You're not going to regret it. Pick this book up as soon as you can, and especially during winter season. It's completely a winter read. I mean, you will feel the cold seeping through your book. Another book I wanted to talk about, it's also a part of a trilogy, and I haven't finished the trilogy this year, unfortunately, but I hope I will do that next year. I read the first two books of the series, but I can still yet say that this is one of my most favorite series of all time, and that is the Darker Shades of Magic series by V. Schwab. And here I have the second book of the series, A Gathering of Shadows, which I read this year, along with the first book, Darker Shades of Magic. I'm gonna be honest, I did not really enjoy the first book. I mean, yes, the characters were lovable and it had a unique setting to start with, and I really love Victoria Sharp's writing. She's one of my favorite authors of all time, but the plot really felt very predictable, and that was something that I was expecting like throughout the whole book, the ending. But the second one, oh my god, that was such a wild ride. I started this book in a very bad reading slump, and I paused reading it because of that slump, but then I started it again. And when I started it the next time, I flew through it, and all the characters of this book are so lovable. V. Schwab has this wonderful ability to write such poetic and beautiful things about these very cynical and dark characters that are that is so amazing and unique. There's this character in this book called Delilah. If you have heard about this book, you probably know her name already because she's such a beloved character, and I can, I can talk about it for an hour about Lila. Like, she's like one of my favorite protagonists of all time in any books. And so a bit more about this book is that it follows our main characters through four different Londons. It's a fantasy book, so there's these four different Londons where we have Grey London, which is our London. We have Red London, which London has magic and stuff like that. Then we have White London, where it's in a sort of extinct. There's this evil magic lurking around everywhere. The people are sort of lifeless, and it's a very eerie and horrifying atmosphere all around. You can say that White London is almost dying, and there's Black London, which is literally a dead and abandoned London, and the people of that London use magic not in a good way, so they paid their prices. And we follow a lot of different characters throughout the series in these four Londons back to back, and it's such a wonderful ride, such a unique ride. In the first book, you sort of imagine what is going to happen, and I think V Shop did it intentionally to set up the tone of the series and to set up to make you root for the characters more, because you follow these characters through an adventure which you sort of predicted what is going to happen, but the interactions that these characters have, the dialogues of these characters are so lovable and so amazing. You feel like they're your friends, you feel like they're talking to you, and it's such a wonderful ride. And the second book has a magical competition setting which I completely loved and adored, and it's so fun to read about magical competitions. And we follow our main characters through this magical competition and through these four different Londons, where a lot of bizarre things happen, but the interaction, especially my favorite thing about this series is basically the interactions these characters have with each other, especially in the second book where a lot of new characters are introduced and we see a lot of more character growth of the previous characters and a lot of relationship growth of these characters. So that is something I very I enjoyed, and I'm really excited to read the final book of the series, and I cannot wait to let you guys know my thought on that. I know I'm going to love it. I know that is going to traumatize me. I'm putting off reading the final book because I really don't want the series to end. So, yeah. Now comes the final book of this video. This book is quite a surprise for me too. It's a poetry collection, so there's not really to give hypnosis about. It's called A Night Sky with No Exit Wounds by Ocean. I don't want to pronounce it wrong, so I'm not going to pronounce it. It's a Vietnamese name, I guess. I'm not going to pronounce it. Ocean. I call him Ocean because he feels like such a close friend of mine, and he's wonderful. So this book is basically a poetry collection by this author who is a Vietnamese American author, and he has this very. I read one of his books, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, previous to this year, but I really enjoyed the writing, but I couldn't really, it's a sort of a memoir, so I'm not really a memoir type of person, so I didn't really enjoy that book specifically, even though I really adored the writing. I fell in love with the poetic way Ocean describes everything, but I could not really, that book did not made it to my list. But this one, I am a huge poetry nerd, and this is the first time I read some modern poetry, by someone, by some poet who is still alive, and I loved it so much. You have these lines, you read this. I read this book twice. First read this book just to read it, and the second time I read it just so that I could highlight some part of the book because I was so engrossed within it. I You really want to have all these lines tattooed in your body because they're so beautiful, so relatable, and Ocean has this wonderful ability to to use these metaphors to portray our very common feelings in a very uncommon, unconventional way, which I fell in love with, and I cannot wait for his upcoming poetry collection next year, which is called, I guess, Time is a Mother. And I'm so excited to read it. I am so glad I picked up his books, even though I'm not really sure I will read any of his novels or memoirs in future. But he's one of my favorite poets of all time. It's wonderful. Please, if you're ever going to read any poetry collection in your life, please read this one. You're not going to regret it. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching. If you have watched till the end, you're amazing. And let's hope I don't go into hibernation again. And I have some really grand plans about making a lot of videos, and let's hope I keep up to that. And thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, subscribe. I promise you will have a lot more contents on these topics about books and me ranting about books a lot. See you again in next video. Bye.